Welcome to Dad's Den of Pop Culture. Today is kind of a special day in the United States of America. It is the anniversary of the attack on Pearl Harbor, 1941, launched the United States much more heavily into the Second World War. We were tangentially involved in it up until that point. And then it got serious. And so today I decided to review a movie. It's kind of an old favorite of mine, even though it does have some problems with it. And we'll talk about that as we go through. It is The Final Countdown, sci-fi film tangentially related to Pearl Harbor Day. So let's jump right into the film. I'm going to, I'll bring up the spoiler sign when we're getting into a place where it makes more sense. That way you can watch the setup, and, you know, if you want to stop at that point and go watch the movie, that'd be awesome. So we begin with the launch of an F-14 Tomcat from land, not from an aircraft carrier. And as it flies off, a helicopter comes in to frame, and we start getting some credits. So Kirk Douglas is in this film, does a great job. Martin Sheen. And while the credits are going, we're watching this limousine driving towards a naval base. And here we see it going through the gates, getting checked by security. Katherine Ross. So now it's driving through the Navy base. James Farantino pulling up near where the ships are docked. Ron O'Neill. And so a guy gets out of this car. I guess it wasn't a limo. At least this one's not a limo. There's going to be a limo. I promise you there's going to be a limo. Folks get out of the car. And as we see Charles Durning's name, Martin Sheen is getting set up to go on this helicopter. So presumably he's going to be heading towards a ship at sea, since he has the life preserver on. There's that limousine I was talking about. So the limousine is there, and it's watching him as he is getting prepared to get on this helicopter. And he catches sight of it. And he heads over. Now, before he can get real close to it, a guy jumps out, shakes his hand. But you kind of get the feeling, too, he's also keeping him from getting much closer to the vehicle. Now, in the vehicle is the guy who this fella, Martin Lasky, works for, a guy with the last name of Tideman. And so Tideman has arranged for him to fly out to the USS Nimitz, supercarrier, and he's not entirely sure why. He's supposed to do some kind of work there, but it's a little nebulous. It's a little bit vague of exactly what he's doing there. So he kind of waves to the people in there. No eye-to-eye meeting, though. So this guy has this man who owns this large corporation has driven all the way out there in his limousine to watch him leave. No eye-to-eye contact. Doesn't say a word to him. Kind of weird. In any event, the limo pulls off. The helicopter launches. That's not really the word I want. Takes off. And the music, which has been very mellow up to this point, now swells, becomes something a little more grandiose. And we now get the title of the film, The Final Countdown. And so as the helicopter is heading off from Pearl Harbor, we see the USS Arizona Memorial. Now, and this is important for the film and important for the reason the film, I think, got an audience. Film came out in 1980, so it's being filmed in 1979. So we're talking about a little less than 40 years since the attack on Pearl Harbor. And so a lot of the people who lived through that period of time and fought in the war or were on the home front were about my age at this point. And you could also think of it as Pearl Harbor was as far away from them as 1985 is from us, which, granted, it's been a while since 85. doesn't feel that ancient. Well, it wasn't ancient history at that point in time. And the feelings people had about Pearl Harbor still ran pretty deep. And so we see then tourists there, a Japanese tourist is highlighted, which I think is important, kind of showing the passage of time and how things have changed. And they do mention, the tour guide or the voice there mentions there were only 289 survivors of the attack. So it was a genuine tragedy. We continue on. They spot this Russian trawler. There's kind of some joking on the helicopter about what do you think they're doing out here? And it's important to remember also that the U.S. Navy helped in the making of this film. So this is not going to be a sort of late 70s, early 80s anti-war kind of movie. And truthfully, American audiences, at least some of them were kind of getting a little bit sick of that particular tenor in films. They wanted something a little different. 1980, of course, the election of Ronald Reagan. There was sort of a certain group had got to have its say, and nobody else did for a while. The guard was starting to change at this point. Not 100%, but it was getting there. So special visual effects by Maurice Binder in this film, most famous for doing a lot of the great James Bond title sequences, from Dr. No to License to Kill. And I think when you see the special effects, you're going to recognize that. Music by John Scott, who's an English composer, did a lot of films. Here we finally see the destination for the helicopter. It is the USS Nimitz. Man, one of the baddest things on the seas at that point in time, without a doubt. Our director of photography is Victor J. Kemper. And at this point in the film, the music, which had become a little more grandiose, becomes a little bit more ominous. What are they heading into here? Story by Thomas Hunter and Peter Powell and David Ambrose. Screenplay by David Ambrose and Jerry Davis and Thomas Hunter and Peter Powell. Love how those credits work out. Produced by Peter Vincent Douglas. And if you notice, Peter Douglas, Kirk Douglas, yes, there is a connection. Peter Douglas is Kirk's son. And so that probably helped in getting his dad to do this film. Directed by Don Taylor. Now, Taylor was an actor before he was a director. Maybe best known films other than this would be Escape from the Planet of the Apes and Damien, Omen 2. So not, the biggest, well-known movies in the world, but, it had a couple somewhat larger B-movie hits. So Lasky is now welcomed aboard the ship, and he is guided to the bridge. And like I said, remember, the Navy helped with this, so we are definitely going to be getting a little bit of a tour of a supercarrier. Obviously nothing that we wouldn't want the Russians to see at that point, but that's an aspect of the film. There was a time when you would get movies that it was a movie, it was a comedy, a romance, or whatever, but it was also a travelogue. So it kind of made a point of, well, think of like Blue Hawaii from Elvis, right? Or Viva Las Vegas. You're seeing the sights as well as the movie, right? And think of this as a travelogue of, a supercarrier and naval aviation. So we now meet our captain, Matthew Yelland, played by Kirk Douglas. I really like the way he plays the role in this. Very professional, very even keel. No stereotype stuff, no super dramatic stuff. It's just that sort of the guy you can rely on. He's a professional. He knows what he's doing, and he's going to see things through. And so at this moment, they're recovering a Tomcat that was, I don't know, flying patrol, whatever it was, before they really head out. And so it's worth noting that the Tomcats are being shown off in this film a few years before we're going to really see them in all their glory in Top Gun. And so we see the ship is approaching the Nimitz there. It's a really nice shot. It manages to land. And the pilot of this particular vessel is Commander Dick Owens, who's played by James Farantino, his call sign, is CAG. And so he lands. He's gonna be in there with everybody in just a moment. And it was just, it was cool to see this kind of stuff back then. It was still, relatively a new thing, the super carriers, these kind of jets. So it was, it was interesting. So we have Lasky being introduced to everybody, and we learn a couple things here. Lasky is a systems analyst, so like an efficiency expert from Tideman Industries. And we also learned that from CAG that the weather is turning rough out there. And so the captain is not real thrilled with having Lasky aboard. He's had to wait a couple days to get on his cruise, waiting for this guy. And Lasky notes, he goes, yeah, it's, something Tideman arranged. He's as mysterious to me as he is to everybody else. He goes, so, Lasky's kind of like, don't blame me. It wasn't my idea. And so we also learned, though, that Tideman helped design the Nimitz. Okay. So there's some tension here between these guys. And again, the captain's looking out, he's seeing lightning, looks like it's stormy. He's saying, hey man, the forecast was for clear skies today. What the hell's going on? So at this moment, down in like the weather station, the weather officer is noting some really strange readings. And so I do give credit to this film. If you don't know what it's about, it really does tease things along pretty nicely until you get to where everything really drops. And that sounds to me like a good time for me to start putting on the spoiler sign here. So Lasky gets a moment to enjoy the opulence of his cabin, and he's maybe a little freaked out because there is a Marine on guard right outside, but he notices there's a door to an adjoining room, and he goes in and he just sort of helps himself to it. So upstairs, they're getting some very weird weather conditions. They're having communication problems with pilots who are still in the air. And the captain is like, give me Black Cloud. That's his weather officer. I want to find out what's going on here. So anyways, back down there, Lasky's reading this manuscript that was on the desk. And CAG now gets back to his cabin, and he's pretty pissed that he's in there, sort of helping himself to things. And so CAG, or Lasky has now managed to kind of piss off two people on board the ship. But what he finds is that CAG is writing a history of the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. That's obviously going to be important to this film. So CAG, heads back up to the bridge. There's a pilot coming back in from patrol, but the communications are really garbled. And so there's a lot of worry about it. Obviously, CAG is in charge of the flight wing, so this is, something he needs to worry about as well. Black Cloud gets up there, and the captain's like, you told me I was going to have fair weather today. And he's saying, look, something really weird is going on here. I don't even understand it. And their scope shows something heading their way. What? They're not really sure. Something is heading their way. And we see in the distance this swirling thing appear on the horizon, but it sort of blinks in and out. It's not there permanently. So the captain orders the accompanying destroyers of his group to head back to Pearl. And now he's going to stay, on course until they can retrieve the Corsair that's still up in the air. And so they find out that it is coming down with a tailhook problem. So they're going to have to rig for a barricade landing. So again, now this is actually, from what I understand, this is something that actually happened while they were filming on board the ship. And so they had the opportunity to film how this was done and include it in the movie. It was not necessarily part of the script. So we then get another shot of this phenomenon that they are, I think it's coming up from behind them. And so it's been a while, but we're now getting to the meat of the film. Now we're going to get to where everything really goes down. Up till now, we've gotten a lot of shots of military aviation, of the ship, etc. And if you're not into that stuff, I could see where you'd probably bored with it. As a kid, I was majorly into this stuff. And so I was absolutely hooked on it. And I think that's one of the reasons I still love this movie to this day and why it was popular with a lot of men at the time. And so they're rigging for the landing, and the people on deck spot this thing sort of coming at them. And at the worst possible time, it overtakes them. And you could see that it's sort of going faster than they are. So it's not exactly sucking them in, but it's just moving over them. And so we get some really cool shots in here. And I think here's where you really can tell the resemblance to those James Bond opening sequences that you used to get back in the day. So the folks are trying to affect the landing, but, everything is going, is shutting down, and there's like this weird piercing noise that's just like almost knocking people completely unconscious. There's people are getting electrocuted from the equipment. It's absolute pandemonium. And then everything's clear. The sea is calm. No sign of this thing in the sky. So what just happened here? And I think that earlier sequence it works because the film is very mundane up to this point. You're not seeing anything crazy. You're not seeing any hint of anything crazy. It's regular military operations. This guy shows up to the boat. What's going on? Okay, so Captain immediately gets on the horn. He's asking for damage reports. He's asking about, are the planes recovered? There's no sign of the plane. So he sounds general quarters. Lasky has no idea what's going on. Of course, he's not really, technically allowed out of his room, I think, at this point, or at least he's not allowed out with the Marine accompanying him. So everybody's scrambling around, and they finally spot the Corsair coming in, and they affect the emergency landing. CAG rushes down to, check on his pilot. And so the captain's trying to figure out, where are my destroyers? They're not on the scope. What is going on here exactly? They can't raise HQ. And they're just getting these kind of coded transmissions. The radar shows completely clear. It's really weird. And definitely at this point, he's thinking this could be the result of enemy action. We could be at war with the Soviet Union right now, for all he knows. So he orders a Hawkeye up to get pictures, has a couple of Tomcats standing by. And here's one of the things I like about the movie is that there's no real panic. He's definitely confused, but there's no panic. He's methodical. Let's do this by the book. Let's figure out what is going on. He's talking to his head people. Of course, they don't know anything either. But it's not like everybody's freaking out. There's no, Lasky, is asking him, well, what's going on? And he's like, frankly, I don't know. So it's not this big dramatic stuff. This is how the military is supposed to respond in a crisis. Now, I was never in the military, so maybe some people who were could be going, oh no, it'll be a little bit crazier than that. But this is certainly how we would want to see our military responding to a crisis situation like this. So in communications, they're breaking the code, and the guy is like, this has got to be some kind of a prank. I haven't seen this since, I learned this back in Great Lakes, so back in training. Why would anybody be using this code? It doesn't make sense. The crew is freaked out. They want answers. And so this whole chunk of the movie is really sort of what is going on? We're trying to figure it out. Are we at war? Is it something else? And the captain gives a speech to his men, and I really like it. He says, we're in general quarters because, frankly, I don't have any idea what's happened, but I don't want to exclude the possibility that we are at war. So again, very calm. And this is like the point where Kirk would be looking at Spock to get some answers. Spock would be looking in his little Viewmaster trying to figure out what's going on. But they know a few things. There's nothing on the threat board. There's no real damage to the ship. The air wing is ready to go. And more importantly, for the audience, in this post-Vietnam War era, what we are seeing is our military, in this case, our, sailors, being shown as human beings, as professionals, as smart, and not as these ravening, warmongering psychopaths that you got a lot of up until this point. And so I think that's another reason this movie really hit big with a certain segment of the audience, is like it was not anti-military. That was a big deal at the time, a bigger deal than maybe, well, I don't know, maybe people do get it nowadays, but I can tell you, as much as people have been angry about the U.S. foreign policy in terms of overseas fighting, the attitude taken towards American servicemen is very different now than it was during, or at least in the later stages of the Vietnam War. It has changed quite a bit. So that was a big deal at the time. So the recon report comes in, and here's where the movie suddenly becomes something like a Twilight Zone episode. Pearl looks fine. There's some odd shipping going on. They're also getting some interesting transmissions on the AM radio band. They tune it in, and it's the Jack Benny Show, which I'd be pretty stoked about. That's a great show. If you never listen to any old-time radio, Jack Benny's a really great place to listen. That dude was something else. So at this point, we get some more military eye candy, which is groovy. Missiles, aircraft preparations. You're seeing, in general quarters, preparing for a potential conflict, what's going on this ship. And they now finally also get a surface contact. So they're going to send some folks out, a plane out, to get eyes on it. And here's where we're going to get some new characters added into this film. Senator Chapman, played by Charles Durning, and Laurel Scott, played by Katherine Ross. And since we're in spoiler territory, the dog does not die. And so we're going to get a moment to see these characters. Chapman is a senator. He's looking at maybe being the next vice president of the United States. So that would be, I believe, in place of Truman. And Laurel Scott is going to help him get there. She's very smart. She's very capable. He's a bit of a cad, but maybe not like too bad, but a little bit of an ego, as you would expect from a major politician. And so while they're talking, the dog runs up on deck and starts barking because he hears something coming. And so that something turns out to be our F-14 Tomcats. Now, the people on the yacht have never seen anything like this. Now, they do note the American markings. The senator is like on, the defense committee or what have you. And he's going, if we had something like this, I would have to know about it. What in the hell is going on? So the F-14s report back to the Nimitz. They say, hey, it's a yacht, small. It looks old, but it looks like it's in good condition, flying an American flag. And now they get a new clue that is going to push the captain towards figuring out that the impossible is occurring, because they get recon photos of Pearl Harbor circa 1941. Battleship Row, they're all there, including the Arizona. While the officers are looking at all this, the enlisted are kind of talking about stuff over themselves, and they're getting a little bit freaked out because they're getting radio transmissions that make it sound like the Russians and the Germans are mobilizing, are actually fighting at this point. And so, is it World War III? Have the Soviets invaded, West Germany? What it would have been at the time. And Yelland, he's going, okay, this could be some kind of a test from the Department of Defense. Maybe that's why Lasky is here. So he asks him one more time, look, no screwing around. No screwing around. Are you in on this? Do you know what is going on? And swears that he's not. So Yellen is in the position of having to make some very big decisions while not being able to communicate with his superiors. And he's taking this very seriously. And upon seeing the recon photo, he gets CAG in there and he's like, okay, you're the expert. You take a look. And CAG is like, Yeah, that's Pearl Harbor, 1941. We have gone through this whatever phenomenon, and we're back in 1941. And apparently before the attack on Pearl Harbor. Now it starts to get fun. And again, something that might be a bigger deal for people from my generation and the couple generations before it, who had more of a relationship to World War II. The F-14s have picked up a contact, something in the air, and it turns out to be a pair of Japanese Zeros. So the captain is now discussing things with his men, and the military guys are like, look, there's no friggin' way we just time traveled. Lasky is singing, it's possible. It's possible. And back on the yacht, they have now spotted the Japanese Zeros coming in, and the Tomcat pilots, relate this to the Nimitz. The Zeros are heading for the yacht, etc. And they open fire on the yacht, strafing runs that eventually blow the thing up. And they're, radioing back. So they're not permitted to engage, but not fire on the Zeros. And by the way, the dog survives. So does Senator Chapman and Laurel. They managed to get off. And so the Tomcat pilots start sort of chasing, the Zeros and really screwing with them in the air. And so this goes on for a little bit because, they've seen the Zeros start trying to pick off survivors. The pilots are pretty pissed off. They want to do something about this. And finally, one of the Zeros opens fire on a Tomcat. Now, the chances of him actually taking it out or really damaging it are small. But when the captain is told that the Zeros are, in fact, heading towards the Nimitz, and he's gradually realizing or coming to accept what's going on, but he does not want them heading his way. He says, splash the Zeros, take them down. And so they do. One is destroyed outright by a missile. The other one, the other one is shot, I think, and crashes into the sea. So there's the possibility the pilot has survived. And if you don't think that a generation that went through World War II and their kids and their grandkids did not enjoy seeing those Zeros just whomped by F-14 Tomcats, you're crazy. This is one of the appeals of the movie. And like I was saying, if you're a millennial, if you're a Zoomer, it probably does not hit the same way. You have maybe great-grandparents who served in World War II, but you probably don't know them. For a lot in Gen X, our grandparents, people we knew, people we loved, people we talked to, had gone through all that experience. And so we had a little bit more of a connection to it than, say, our kids and grandkids have. So the Hawkeye now reports back, the Japanese fleet is out there, and it is heading towards Pearl to attack. And so this becomes the focus of the film at this point, the quandary of, should the Nimitz engage the Japanese fleet? And all of us, like military buffs, are going, oh, please, I want to see that. That's going to be cool. So the survivors, 2 from the yacht and the Japanese pilot and the dog, because a good patriotic American film is not going to let the dog die, they are rescued and land on the carrier. And the Japanese pilot is starting to think that maybe they've made a slight mistake in attacking the United States, because they didn't know they had anything like this. And so if the movie, though, does have a problem, it drags a little bit through this of the will they or won't they, should they or shouldn't they. And so, for example, the fleet hasn't technically attacked yet. So would attacking be an act of war? Is there a time paradox? Are we going to change the future if we do something here? It's that kind of stuff. Now, people more intelligent than I have said that no, there wouldn't be a paradox, because the Nimitz, if it's in 1941, doing things in 1941, then that all happened back in 1941. It doesn't mean that it doesn't matter that it came from the future. It just matters when it shows up in the past. So all those time travelers who have gone back to try to assassinate Hitler, well, they all failed because we know, in fact, that Hitler was not assassinated. It doesn't matter that they're from the future. What they did is in the past. And CAG pretty much takes this point of view. The past cannot be changed. So don't worry about that. And so we get something kind of, again, similar to the Kirk, Spock, McCoy dynamic in Star Trek. The captain has to make a decision. He's got Lasky saying, let's attack. He's got CAG sort of saying we shouldn't do anything. You know, he's kind of getting pulled both ways. And I believe first officer at this point kind of cuts through all the bullshit. He says, look, this is a war situation and we are a United States warship. And that's all that matters. So I guess he's Scotty in my metaphor. I'm not really sure. The captain, all right, let's stay calm. If the United States of America falls under attack, our job is to defend it, past, present, or future, and we will answer to our commander-in-chief, who at the moment is Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Doesn't matter when the ship was built. It's a U.S. warship. It's a U.S. Navy ship. We take our orders from the commander-in-chief, and we will defend the United States. So from this point on, most of the character work we're going to get is through the Japanese pilot and the other survivors. That's where we're going to get our character moments. So we'll have our, we got big decisions to make. Are we going to attack? Are we going to fight? And then we have these folks who are just sort of trying to deal with the situation, the very odd situation they find themselves in. They've been put in this sort of isolated room. They don't know what's going on outside. Chapman is like, he's getting kind of pissed. What the hell is going on here? I'm on the Senate Defense Committee. I have never heard of this super ship or these super aircraft. And it makes sense that he'd be a little bit freaked out right now. But again, there's also some ego. Like, don't you know who I am? And they're sort of like, no, we really don't know who you are. So Lasky now discovers what CAG already knew. Senator Chapman and his yacht had actually disappeared just before the attack on Pearl Harbor. Have they already changed the future at this point? So when CAG and Lasky go to speak to Chapman, it creates an opportunity for the Japanese pilot to escape and grab a gun. He shoots some people. Charlie the dog, who's kind of responsible, runs out of there and gets away. Very dog behavior. And so with lives on the line, Yellen has to make some tough decisions. The Marines are ready to go in. The pilot demands access to a radio so he can warn his superiors, or he will kill again. They do have a man on board the ship who can understand Japanese. He does the translation. So Yellen agrees. And this keeps the movie rolling forward. But like I said, you've dangled in front of us the idea that the Nimitz is going to attack the Japanese fleet. And that's what we want to see. And so some of this, you're kind of going, okay. But get to the point where we get to see big explosions. So the pilot attempts to leave the room, takes Laurel hostage. And this is going to lead to Laurel and CAG becoming a little bit closer to one another. Lasky urges CAG to tell the pilot everything he knows. And so he starts doing exactly that. At exactly this time, etc., the code name or the code word is going to be spoken. The attack's going to begin on Pearl Harbor, and Japanese pilot is amazed. How does he know this? And Senator Chapman is just as amazed. Like, what is going on here? Who are these people? It's really kind of crazy. But there is this distraction from the pilot, gives him an opportunity. Laurel gets away from him. He does shoot one more Marine. The other two basically blow the guy away. So CAG takes Laurel back into the room, is trying to comfort her. She's just like, what is going on here, man? Like, her whole world's been turned upside down. She's horrified. So Captain Yellen now meets with Senator Chapman. And you got to appreciate the bizarre situation that Yellen is in. You know, he's trying to keep things smoothed over, but I mean, this is a really weird situation to be in. And he also has to think, look, this is a sitting senator in the United States. How much respect do I have to show this guy just because I'm sort of here from a different time period? And so Chapman, he wants to immediately inform Pearl Harbor about what's going on. And Yellen, he's a good commander, rational, calm, in command. And so he says, okay, let's let you do it. So Chapman contacts Pearl Harbor. And they think he's some kind of a nut playing a prank. USS Nimitz. Nimitz doesn't have any damn ships named after him. Captain Yellen, who the hell are you talking about? You know, get off the thing. Stop screwing around. And of course, he's getting really pissed off because there is that ego factor with him. And meanwhile, Laurel has completely charmed CAG, which is kind of a weird situation to be in. You're kind of falling in love with a woman from 1941. How's that going to go? Japanese fleet is still on course for Pearl Harbor. Decisions need to be made. Chapman demands that he and Laurel be flown to Pearl. If they can see him in person, obviously, they're going to know who he is. Lasky disagrees, doesn't think that's maybe a good idea. I like this line, though, from Yellen. He says, my job is to make decisions now, not worrying about who's going to be in office 4 years from now or 40 years in the past. And he adds, I don't want civilians on board my ship if I'm going into battle. So he's clearly made his decision on what he's going to do. When Lasky leaves, Yellen tells CAG, I want you to fly them to some different island. Drop them off. We'll pick them up afterwards. I don't want them in Pearl Harbor. And he goes, and I want you back by 0700 because I want you commanding the strike force. So they take off from, with the helicopter from the Nimitz. And Yellen now makes a speech to everybody on board the ship. Some good lines. We're about to fight a battle that was lost before most of you were even born. With God's help, it's going to be different. Good luck. And so now, again, we're seeing a great portrait in leadership. You could learn a lot from the way this character is portrayed. So now we see the preparations. They're going into battle with the Japanese fleet. Again, this is just for military folks or for folks who love all this stuff. It's like crack. It's awesome. And these are actual crewmen on the ship doing all this. So there's folks out there. You might be seeing your granddad, your great granddad, in action for just a second there. So Lasky, wandering through the ship, finds Charlie, the dog. When CAG arrives on the island, Chapman realizes what's happening and he freaks out like he's PO'd. And he attempts to force them to take him back with a flare gun. Now, CAG and Laurel have already gotten off the helicopter at this point, and there's an accident, and he manages to blow up the helicopter and everybody on it and strand CAG and Laurel on this little island. So Chapman still disappears. History so far is being fulfilled. And so the Nimitz now is turned into the wind. Aircraft begin launching. More aircraft porn. Is it padding? Maybe. Is it excessive? Probably. Is it awesome? Definitely. Poor CAG. I mean, think about it. This poor guy is now trapped on this beautiful desert island with this amazing woman, and he's missing out on the fight. But important thing here is that Laurel in this scene discovers the truth. She opens up this box of rations, sees 1979, and knows these guys come from the future. So, before any words are spoken between them, they see the Japanese aircraft overhead flying, heading towards Pearl Harbor. And we get shots of the two opposing forces heading towards each other. 9 minutes to intercept, 9 minutes before everything changes for everyone on Earth. And the phenomenon appears again behind the aircraft carrier, and they cannot outrun it. And so we go once again through a very similar sequence, the noise, etc. Apparently CAG was right, and history is very hard to beat. So Yellen decides to scrub the mission, much to the chagrin of Lasky. He wants his aircraft back on board. He does not want to, lose anybody. But Lasky's like, no, we gotta outrun this. We can correct all the mistakes of the past. We can't lose this opportunity. And as they're sucked back into to 1979, we have interspersed images from the actual, film of the actual attack on Pearl Harbor, the men going through all the, the noises and all that kind of stuff. And it's followed by some tense moments as they wait to see if the aircraft made it through the time travel tunnel. And they did. And so they're going to start landing. And they head back into Pearl. We see the Nimitz through the USS Arizona Memorial. They dock. Admiral arrives on board. They're like, oh man, this is not going to be fun. And you have to think that, this could be the end of Yellen's career, potentially, if they don't believe him. Lasky takes one more look at that manuscript on Cag's desk. Cag is gone, obviously. Heads out. One last word with the captain, who says, you were a real pain in the ass. But it's they part friends. And so he disembarks and he sees Tideman's limo. He sees his boss's limo. And Lasky's got Charlie the dog with him. Charlie takes off, running for the limo, and we hear a very familiar voice, Charlie. And when he gets down there, his boss is in fact Cag, and he had married Laurel. And so they say, why don't you get in the car? We got a lot to talk about. We've got a lot of catching up to do. And that is the end of the film. So if there's any problems with the movie, it is in the fact that none of the decisions people are making really have an impact per se. It's kind of like the whole thing about what Indiana Jones, like if he hadn't been there, everything would have gone on more or less the same as it did, or would have the same ending in the film. So there is that issue with this movie. But again, I think the reason I love it, and a lot of guys glommed onto it back in the day, was the military aspect. It was cool to see all this stuff, big screen, full color. F-14 Tomcat. This is spanking new technology, man. These are amazing aircraft. They're still probably pretty solid, air combat units. If you're not dealing with the absolute latest generations of fighters. And it was also that moment of, we could beat the Japanese. We could prevent Pearl Harbor. We could end the war before it begins. Think of all the thousands, millions of lives that would benefit. There doesn't have to be Hiroshima and a Nagasaki. You could wind up the war in the Pacific just like that. Head to the European theater. End it. Maybe you prevent at least some of the deaths from the Holocaust. Is there this is something that people who live through all this stuff, it matters to them. Pearl Harbor and World War II brought massive changes to the United States. Remember that prior to World War II and our entry, the United States, we had a good, solid Navy, maybe not the most up-to-date, but pretty darn close, because we needed that to defend our nation. That was our front line. Had no Air Force, really. We had an Army Air Corps. But we also had a very small standing army. We were not as much a military power in the world as the United States is today. And the reason we are today was because of World War II and the Cold War that followed it. So you can't underestimate the impact that Pearl Harbor had to this day on America and on the world. And the idea of it going a different way, and the idea of seeing, hey, it was a surprise attack, man. It was a stab, maybe not exactly a stab in the back, but it was a cheap shot. And seeing, the Japanese fleet get blown out of the water, it's kind of a cool thing to think about. So it hit, especially men, but it hit older generations different than it might hit younger people today. So again, there are problems with the movie, frankly, in terms of the narrative and the plot. I don't care. I love this movie. I've seen it dozens of times. I'll see it many more times before I pass from this mortal coil, I hope. And hey, maybe you want to go check it out as well. Let's take the spoilers off. So there you have it. The Final Countdown, 1980. Neat little military movie. Important for its time period. Important for the people that were alive at that time. And maybe go give it a look. Let me know in the comments what you think of this film if you've seen it. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments, and I'll do my best to answer them without spoiling the movie for you. Until next time, though. Oh, almost forgot. Like, subscribe, share. You got to say that every time, apparently, or nothing good happens to your channel. But until next time, God bless everybody. Please be kind to one another. Have a little bit of fun out there. And I will see you again, hopefully soon, in Dad's Den of Pop Culture. Bye-bye.